Classic Rock Beagle.
And welcome to the Annals of the Classic Rock Beagle. Moser and I study issues and topics from the classic rock period, which I define as roughly from the issue of the Rubber Soul album to the start of nu metal. Moser's handling the tech duties for this video, as you can see. I've always been a little technologically challenged, a little behind the curve, you might say. I didn't even go on the internet until 2002. Yeah. Bad Doggy. Today we're going to start a regular segment called Album Rank, where we'll rank the officially released studio albums from a particular band from worst to best. Starting with my favorite band, no! Ow! Today we'll be looking at Fleetwood Mac. Music was certainly in the home when I was growing up. But as a kid, sports was my life, not music. That all changed in the summer of 1982. A song called Hold Me made me fall in love with music. I went out and bought Mirage and I digested every note, every harmony, every instrument. I started listening to music differently. Southern Cross came out at about the same time, and I was parsing the harmonies. A couple months later, I, quote, borrowed, end quote, my brother's copy of Rumors. The first time I listened to You Make Loving Fun, that reconfigured my DNA. With Chris's exquisite sustained B-flat at the end of the song, I was compelled to make my own music. Within a few months, I started playing guitar and drums. Now, I had been playing piano since I was about 3 or 4, but now I would hear a song on the radio and then try to play it. Within a couple years, I started writing shitty rip-offs of Bad Company, Beatles, and Boz Scaggs songs. Now here I am at 50 with a lifetime of making music, because Fleetwood Mac and particularly Christine McVie made me fall in love with music when I was 12. So this is a list of their albums from worst to best, my all-time favorite band, Fleetwood Mac. That's right, Moser. Remember, only full official studio releases, so no greatest hits compilation, no bootleg, no reissue, no live album. And you won't see the dance or the EP from 2013 on this list. Ooh. Starting with, in my opinion, their worst album. This album featured John, Mick, and Christine from the classic lineup, plus Billy Burnett from the previous lineup. New to the Mac were veteran Dave Mason on guitar, and former Zoo singer Becca Bramlett on vocal, daughter of 60s icons Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett. My favorite song on the album actually features Michael John Kell's Fleetwood on vocal. My Hero is pretty solid on this album, but a little lower than her usual standards. I get the feeling she was worn out at this point. In fact, Mick had to beg her to record some tracks, which were recorded separately with Michael Thompson on guitar. You can give the rest of the album a miss. Dave Mason and Billy Burnett were completely uninspired, and Becca Bramlett shares her mother's propensity to oversing. Kelly Clarkson would tell her to lighten up. Her belting does give a boring album personality, but here it's not a good thing.
We don't need any characters around to give the joint atmosphere.
Mick and Chris provide some good material, but most of it's a mess. Time is a mediocre album. Next. Fleetwood Mac is essentially 3 bands. You have the Peter Green-led blues band, the Bob Welch era, and the Buckingham Nicks era. Please understand that I enjoy each of these eras. This placement is no indictment on the blues era, but you know this album wasn't well received at the time, right? Mick Fleetwood said it was recorded in 4 days and it sounds like it. Mr. Wonderful doesn't have the hustle of their first album, nor the sophistication of Then Play On. This is generic blues. We also have to come to grips with the fact that Jeremy Spencer just isn't very good. 4 of his 6 songs on this album begin with the same riff. And the productions did seem to take a step backward from their debut. Recording the album through mic'd amps rather than by plugging into the soundboard seemed to have been a mistake. And the addition of horns detracts from their creativity more than adds to their sound. Piano by Perfect Christine did help, but this album seemed like a light version of their debut. Mr. Wonderful is a decent album, but Fleetwood Mac needs to be better than that. They usually are. Next. While Fleetwood Mac was touring in America at the beginning of 1969, they went into the studio with some of the legends of Chicago blues to record this double album. This is prime Fleetwood Mac jamming with blues legends like Buddy Guy, Otis Spann, Willie Dixon, and Shaky Horton. True, but they are still really very good. Chicago blues was an enormous influence in Fleetwood Mac. You'd figure this would be an amazing album, right? Well, kinda. Willie Dixon's string bass was as glorious as John's electric bass, and it was really nice to hear Otis Spann and J.T. Brown's contributions especially. In Chicago had some amazing moments to be sure, but overall it was a disjointed mess. There were false starts and the constant noodling and talking. Mick even had problems at times finding the beat. This was an underproduced and unfocused album. That's kind of the charm of this project, but it still feels very rushed. After all, they did record it all on one Saturday in January 1969. Blues Jam in Chicago is a decent album. Next. This one hurts. It really, really hurts. Please understand, Hold Me was the game changer in my musical life. Mirage was the first album I ever bought. I devoured it as a kid. I had a shrine on my wall around the album cover when I was 13. There are some really, really good tracks on here. But if I'm going to give you my honest opinion, and I will, there's also a lot of filler on Mirage. A lot of filler. Stevie's worst Mac song is on Mirage. My note from Empire State when I was putting this together was simply, God make it stop. There are 4 incredible songs here, 2 from Chris and 2 from Stevie, and a couple more good songs. The rest of Mirage, that's half the album, just is not very good. This is a more positive sounding album, which should have worked and did at times. Honestly, it was necessary for my development as a musician to both fall in love with an album and then to discover there's much better music out there. For both, I thank Mirage, a decent album. Next. Named after the house in which they lived at the time of the recording, Kiln House was the first album without Peter Green and their last album before Christine McVie formally joined the band. Green was such a monumental figure in Fleetwood Mac prior to this album. How would they recover? Well, Kiln House is more of a rock and roll revival album, but they didn't abandon the blues altogether. One thing you'll see from time to time, we'll talk about an album like it's several albums, one for each songwriter. This comes into play here. Kiln House was Danny Kirwan's breakout album. Easily the best song on this album was Station Man. Danny really hit his stride as a songwriter and guitarist on this album. Jeremy, well, at least his version of Hi Ho Silver was pretty good. Chris was her most active here of any album before she formally joined the group in January 1971, providing keyboards and backing vocal and even drawing the album cover. Kiln House, a decent album. Next. Actually, this placing should not surprise you if you've been paying attention to this video. Fleetwood Mac and particularly Christine McVie made me fall in love with music. Both Stevie and Lindsay are on form here when they don't work against each other. There are some really strong tracks here. Lindsay in particular has really diverse songs that work. I especially liked Peacekeeper, Bleach Lover, and Goodbye. Stevie had a great album at her peaks. The title track is an amazing song, and listening to Mick and John hit some amazing grooves on songs like Illume and Everybody Finds Out. Like the Beatles' White Album, some really strong tracks cover up the fact that there were perhaps too many songs on Say You Will. If this album had been Lindsay and Stevie's 4 best songs, plus Chris's 4 best from In the Meantime, this would have been amazing. Both Stevie and Lindsay's best work on here stand up really well. But if Mirage doesn't get a pass for filler, Say You Will doesn't either. Say You Will, a decent album. Next. Fleetwood Mac's legendary debut album. Peter Green had successfully replaced God in the Blues Breakers, and then he stole the rhythm section and released this album. The album was a rousing success, reaching as high as number 4 on the British charts, and is considered one of the seminal British blues recordings of all time. The fact that this album is so low will start narrowing down to you what is and what is not my favorite Fleetwood Mac era. Yeah, I know. I do enjoy this record, though. I really do. Peter Green is in top form, and as a bass player myself, bass lives matter. I can verify that John McVie kills on this album. Rolling Stone compares this album favorably to what Paul Butterfield was doing at the time, although they did call it more derivative than creative, which it is actually. If you're a blues guy, this is your album. I can appreciate this album, but straight blues has a limited run for me. Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac is a decent album. Next. Then Play On is more experimental than Fleetwood Mac's previous albums. We're going to go here with the original British album, as America was always playing catch-up to the British catalog in the Peter Green era. There are some real highlights on here, including the legendary Rattlesnake Shake. But Then Play On is a bit too slow at times. Especially Peter Green's songs see more experimental elements. You'll find Mick playing songs in tambourine, congas, timpani, or not at all. Danny Kirwan's song Like Crying, which you hear playing now, features just Danny and Pete playing guitar and singing harmonies. Many of their best songs in this era, Oh Well, Black Magic Woman, Green Monalishi, Man of the World, Butterfly, Albatross, They were not on any albums. Something about something non-album single, something money. They did, however, have room for a couple inexplicable instrumentals about Madge. Whatever their reason is for doing this, Then Play On suffers as a result. One plus on this album, Jeremy Spencer makes no appearance. Then Play On is a good album. Next. Bare Trees was actually the third Fleetwood Mac album I ever owned. I had heard Hypnotized on the radio by this time, so I was aware that there was a pre-Buckingham Nicks era of Fleetwood Mac by the time I bought this record. Despite the somber title, Bare Trees is the hardest rocking album they recorded while Bob Welch was in the band. By this time, Danny Corwin had completely alienated the rest of this band, but his music was so important to the group that there was no question of terminating his services yet. As Danny was getting closer to Happy Times Sanitarium, his music kept getting better. Danny wrote 5 of the 9 songs on Bare Trees. And the songs were very divergent styles, which I thought was quite interesting. The last song that he wrote for Fleetwood Mac, Dust, is a gem. Bare Trees also featured the original version of Bob Welch's later solo hit, Sentimental Lady. The Songbird also had her first great song with the Mac, Spare Me a Little of Your Love. The album concludes with a poem by a lady who lived near the house Fleetwood Mac lived in at the time. Bare Trees is a good album. Next. This was the first album recorded after guitarist producer Lindsey Buckingham left in 1987. One would think that this would cause Behind the Mask to be a subpar album. It wasn't. They recruited Billy Burnett from Mick Fleetwood's Zoo and Rick Vito from Bob Seger's band to replace Lindsey. One thing I really appreciate about Fleetwood Mac is that they don't follow trends. Believe me, it was excruciating to hear Yes play New Jack Swing. Not only that, but they also do not try to pigeonhole their new talent, in this case Burnett and Vito, into Buckingham clones. And it worked really well. Burnett and Vito turned in some really good songs on Behind the Mask. In addition, Stevie had her best Mac album since Tusk. This was unfortunately the only album for this lineup after the tour Stevie, Chris, and Rick left the band. Honestly, there's no filler on this album. No legendary song either, though. It's just a good mix of songs and a good listen. The ceiling for what Fleetwood Mac can be was lower because Lindsey wasn't there. But if you judge Rick and Billy's contributions for their own merits, Behind the Mask is still a great album. Next. At this point, Fleetwood Mac is understandably trying to find their footing after Danny Corwin's expulsion from the group on the Bare Trees tour. As difficult as Danny was to replace, they moved on by adding Dave Walker on vocal and Bob Weston on guitar. About Dave Walker. Dude, you know you're not meant to be in a band long when you're the front man and you only get to sing a couple songs on an album. Reference David Palmer on Can't Buy a Thrill and Bobby Kimball on Toto 4. Bob Weston, however, was a fantastic replacement on guitar. In my opinion, he's a better guitar player than even Danny Corwin. Christine McVie and Bob Welch are getting more comfortable on this album as songwriters. Dissatisfied even has a bit of a Motown vibe. Fleetwood Mac's only Dave Walker penned song is a great one. To give you an idea, I recorded the mashup of The Derelict and The Wait, and it works really well. Despite the loss of Danny Corwin, Penguin outsold each of its predecessors. It was also the highest album chart in the US up to that time, reaching number 49. Penguin is a great album. Next. During the previous tour, guitarist Bob Weston was caught philandering with Mrs. Fleetwood. The Macs suspended operations in the middle of their tour as they understandably kicked Weston out. Their manager, Clifford Davis, continued to tour with session musicians, calling themselves Fleetwood Mac. The court eventually ruled that the band belonged to the musicians rather than management. This left Fleetwood Mac battle-weary going into the studio. The result was Heroes Are Hard to Find, which was the first Fleetwood Mac album to crack the top 40 in the US. Bob Welch always had a mellow vibe, but he sounded bored on Heroes. He did his best to do lead guitar, but this was a band with the pedigree of Peter Green, Danny Kirwan, and Bob Weston at the time, and the difference was notable. What sets Heroes apart is that this was Christine McVie's best album. Heroes Are Hard to Find was a great album, almost entirely on the merits of Mrs. McVie. Next. Tusk stands most in need of the separate albums treatment. Even John McVie noted that Tusk sounds like the work of 3 solo artists. Both Chris and Stevie had some great output here. Lindsay's tracks, though, disappointed me greatly. Generally, I like Lindsay's songs, but he was stuck in a "fuck you Stevie" lyrics and "I don't care as long as it's not rumors" rut. Hello? It's Lindsay fan. He says, ah! Along with the top-notch material, there was too much filler on this double album. This is often the case for double albums. Ahem. Ahem. Stevie's run from Rumors to Belladonna was remarkable. Even more remarkable was Chris's stretch from Mystery to Me to Tusk. During that entire stretch, 5 albums in 7 years, Chris only had 1 decent song. Sugar Daddy was a decent song. Everything else she did during that stretch was amazing. A strange choice for album opener in Over and Over. That's a good song. I've even recorded it, but it's no opener. There were strange choices throughout Tusk. Some worked out spectacularly, like Sisters of the Moon. Some not so much, like The Ledge. All in all, the awesome outweighed the okay. Tusk is a great album. Next. I discovered Fleetwood Mac at age 12, and it transformed my life. Then I went backwards and discovered the rest of their catalog by my 14th birthday. Their follow-up album didn't come out until I was 17. I went from 8th grade to the end of my senior year in high school with no new Fleetwood Mac. That's an eternity at that age. The expectation I had for Tango was as intense as I've experienced in my lifetime, certainly about music. You know what? Tango in the Night did not disappoint. I took a lot of flack in high school for being such an overt fan of what was considered a mom band at the time. And I was rewarded with Tango being both their most successful and their best album since Rumors. Now over 30 years removed from all those emotions, Tango in the Night has stood up really well. What an accomplishment on an album that was every bit as dysfunctional to make as Rumors. One fun part about the new album is the expectation of seeing whose song gets released as the opening single. Here it was Lindsay, and I couldn't have been happier. Tango in the Night is Lindsay's strongest album. Tango in the Night is a great album. Next. Okay, the oversimplified version of the story is this. Bob Welch was leaving Fleetwood Mac. While looking for a guitar player, Mick heard a random song and said, "Give me that guitar player." The guitar player then said, "Not without my girlfriend." That's how we got the classic lineup of Fleetwood Mac. It was magic when the five made music together. Chris and Lindsay in particular established an instant chemistry, as heard on songs like World Turning. Fleetwood Mac had lost their popularity in England after Peter Green left, but were building up success in the US leading up to the White Album. Buckingham Nicks, the Newbies, had been a country-flavored folk rock group, sounding nothing like any previous incarnation of the Mac. Mick had the good sense of letting Lindsay control the guitar in his own style, other than suggesting that he play with the pick. Over My Head was Fleetwood Mac's first US top 10 song. The success of Rhiannon and Say You Love Me cemented their place in the rock pantheon. A worthy prelude to the legendary Rumors album, Fleetwood Mac features both my favorite Lindsay and my favorite Stevie songs. Fleetwood Mac is a legendary album. Next. With the departure of Jeremy Spencer, Peter Green temporarily rejoined the band to complete the Kilnhouse tour. They replaced him with American Bob Welch for Future Games. This is also the first album to feature Christine McVie as a full-time member. Although I'm sure you would expect me to fawn over Chris's first Fleetwood Mac songs, as good as they are, the star of Future Games is Danny Kirwan. Sands of Time is a brilliant, hypnotizing song. Woman of a Thousand Years was actually the first Fleetwood Mac that I recorded on my own CDs. And the title track is actually my favorite Bob Welch song of all time. The album is perhaps their most mellow one, top to bottom, other than Then Play On, but its melodies are too strong to hold down. The weak song on Future Games was the instrumental What a Shame. It almost sounds as if Fleetwood Mac shat out a hastily recorded jam to satisfy a label obligation or something. Oh, imagine that. Future Games is a legendary album. Next. The fact that Rumors is here and not at number 1 should complete the picture of ranking my favorite Fleetwood Mac eras. Now that I've placed Rumors at number 2, here for a rebuttal is Moser. My placing Rumors at number 2 is not an indication on Rumors, but about my number 1 selection. Let me state for the record, Rumors is not overrated. Rumors was the second record I owned, and listening to it made quite an impression on me. Remember, You Make Loving Fun was the song that made me a musician. I love to point out that Rumors was so good that a great song like Silver Springs was left off of it. The production here was exquisite. Something simple like the 8th note tap of Mick's hi-hat becomes remarkable. I never cared about the drama, but man, it made for some great music. Stevie and Lindsay's breakup dynamics are found all over the album's lyric sheet. Chris actually wrote 2 songs supportive of John during their breakup, Don't Stop and Songbird. It was sweet to see that she didn't feel the need to throw John under the bus, unless she was singing about the lighting guy. Obviously, this was the most successful Mac album, selling over 40 million copies, and for good reason. As poorly as the band was getting along personally, they were getting along really well musically. Come on, you wouldn't bite me. That's not the way of the Mighty Beagle. It's one of the all-time classic albums for a reason. Rumors is a legendary album. Next. Yep. The best album has the worst cover art. Mystery to me is rock solid top to bottom, except for an inexplicable cover of the Yardbirds' For Your Love. As songwriters Bob Welch and Christian McVie were both in stellar form, and Bob Weston pulled down the lead guitar again on this and put on a clinic on slide guitar. My favorite all-time Fleetwood Mac song is on this album. In case you haven't guessed, Why is my favorite Mac song, and it's actually my second favorite song overall. I said earlier in the review that Heroes was Christine's best album. This album's right behind it. And if I thought Bob Welch was off his game a bit on Heroes, he is in top form on this one. And just listen to John on songs like Forever and Miles Away going off. I can't praise this album highly enough. The verdict? Simply the greatest album ever made. Kinda. Let me put Dark Side of the Moon under that kind of scrutiny before I sign on to that statement. So there you have it. Our ranking of all 18 official Fleetwood Mac albums from worst to best. I'm so glad that we could share our points of view. It's refreshing just to listen to our divergent opinions. Hi!
Scene 21, take 1.
I need to call.
You need me to call?
Yeah. Let me make sure I got the ringer on here.